Representative Matt Gaetz, I can hear you, I think. Are you there? Yes. Finally,
Oh,
finally.
score.
Let's do this.
Oh, I feel like we've now got audio privilege. We should probably have to disclaim it.
Yes, I feel a little bit guilty about this. First of all, you have started a new podcast called Hot Takes, which is terrific. How's that going?
Well, I really enjoy it. I think that the news of the day really opens the door into the questions that we have to answer in the Congress, whether they're questions about the nature of speech in this country or really what we see going on with an effort to, I think, dismantle America by trying to make us love her less. And I am just unapologetically pro-American. I think this is the greatest country ever. But I think the tactics that we see to try to deconstruct our history, to try to take away a sense of national pride are far more dangerous than just, the destruction of a statue. I think they're really trying to get to the destruction of the system.
Well, let's talk about that. So I have not fully bought into the conspiracy that there's a master plan. I believe that there are probably some people who think of it in the long term, but what percentage of the protesters do you think have a master plan versus they like the fun, they're angry, it'll burn itself out? How do you break that down? The master Marxist planners versus the people who are just having fun looting and protesting and free speech?
I think that it is driven by the money. I mean, I think that a substantial amount of the money that has existed for the infrastructure of these organizations is fueled by a neo-Marxist desire to shame America into a crouch, both domestically and on the global stage. And I think that there is a general grievance movement that is out there. They'll show up and occupy Wall Street if you want them to. They'll show up for a Black Lives Matter protest if you want to. They're just sort of in for the grievance. And I think that makes up a lot of the volume of the humans. But the money is, the financial desire to see this neo-Marxist revolution combined with sort of the corporate America white guilt payoffs.
So who exactly is the money behind this? Because it's hard to see anybody who could gain by more socialism, because that basically kills. I mean, that is, might as well throw your money in a big pile and set it on fire. Who can make money by paying the United States to destroy itself?
Well, I mean, I think that there are foreign entities that benefit from this. I mean, we have seen some reports that there have been Venezuelans, Cubans that have tried to infiltrate some of the leadership of these organizations to try to fuel anti-Americanism and sow division. We know beyond that there are foreign influences in the Black Lives Matter branding, particularly from Russia and China. They use these racial divisions to try to stoke more anger and tension in our country. But I think that for the most part, the call is coming from inside the house. I mean, I think that within our country, there is a grievance culture, and this is the current manifestation.
How compatible do you think Black Lives Matter leadership is with whatever the Antifa, if you can even call it that, any kind of leadership or at least leading voices? Do you think Black Lives Matter and Antifa are even on the same page with each other?
I doubt that is a sustainable coalition or a resilient coalition. Right now, they're sort of united around a common enemy. And sadly, that enemy is our sense of national pride and national identity. What those groups have in common is that they believe that America being that shining example, that America being the best version of herself, is damaging to their sense of grievance.
Now, how do you deal with the fact that America as a brand, we like to, if you love your country, you like to put it in the best possible light, but it is nonetheless true that America has a violent and brutal racist past that got us where we are. Now, how do you keep your brand and your love of your country while still being honest about how we got here?
Well, I think we could be honest about the fact that all human history is full of identity-based violence, full of brutality, full of sort of human competition and the negative impulses that can create. all of that said, in a world of relativism, I'll take the United States and our development and our promotion of values and our sense of inclusion over just about any other human society in all of human history, because it creates the unifying principle of prosperity and opportunity for people.
You know, my take on all this, and I want to see what you think about it, is that when we focus on the problems, we have taken a sort of a loser mindset, which is, oh, I'm disadvantaged, you've got privilege, I don't, etc. And while all of that can be true, sometimes not, but it certainly could be true, how does that change the fact that all of us have an individual strategy? And if everybody followed the same strategy, we'd all get pretty good results, meaning pay attention in school, don't have a baby when you're 14, don't go on drugs, you know, work hard, have some, you know, additions to your talent stack, etc. So they're fairly basic things to do that everybody can succeed, which works actually better if you're black, frankly. Because if you knew that corporate America is literally begging for more people of color because they need it, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on them. So everybody has a 3-lane highway in America if they follow the same strategy. Why are we focusing on the problems and our disadvantages, which is just divisive, instead of figuring out how to get better mentoring, better education, better strategy? Because if everybody had a good strategy, they'd probably all do well.
I think you're right. I agree that when we unify around the common opportunity that exists in this country for any who are willing to work hard, play by the rules, we draw more people to the cause. But I don't think that every sort of sectionalized group wants that unity. I think that there are leaders in some groups of people, and I'm not even talking about, you know, racial identity. I mean, I think you see this geographically. I think you see it politically, where people think that division sort of creates an opportunity within their movement for their own advancement and for their own leadership. But I think that when you talk about focusing on the positive, we also have to do that with Americanism. And so often, like, for example, in the immigration debate, we're told, oh, well, the way Republicans talk about this is xenophobic, it's racist. My view is that if we instead focus on that positive, the wonder, the exceptionalism that comes with being an American, something so worth preserving and being proud of, that also can be a more unifying call. And unfortunately, I think we take the bait as conservatives, not even as conservatives, just as people who believe in America, we take the bait and grant the premise that somehow there is something flawed with our founding and with our history. And I think if we acknowledge that all humans have complications, challenges, and multi-dimensions in our history, but that ours is absolutely the best, that hopefully that can prevail. But, you know, we surrendered the ground in schools, probably 15, 20 years ago, Scott, and I think that we're starting to see the manifestation of the egalitarianism that we embraced in education and this cultural relativism.
You know, when you look at base problems and you're trying to figure out, all right, where's the big lever? What's the most impactful thing we could do? It just all comes down to school, doesn't it? I mean, I know some people are going to say having parents, but I'm not sure you can fix the parent thing right away. But the school thing seems like something that the government could fix if it focused on it.
It is the great equalizer. My dad was superintendent of schools in the community where I grew up. He was never a teacher or a principal. He was a business person that was elected to the position because he thought that if we could improve the operations of our schools, that the outcomes would be better, and ultimately they were. But I think education associations, the unions, I think some of the social justice warriors that attacked curriculum in particular made a lot of progress while we had our eye off the ball. A lot of Republicans over the last 15, 20 years have been focused on how do we teach your kid coding, while the left has been worried about, how we sand away the founding values of America. And I think they made progress in that regard.
There's something that you and President Trump and I have in common in terms of mindset, unless you disagree with this, which is even if I'm looking at an optimistic future or let's say a rosy picture of America, I do that strategically. In other words, I know that when I put my positive thoughts into the universe, I just get a better result, even if they're unrealistic. And I feel like that's just an intentional strategy. But if you look at it not as a strategy, it just looks like you're loopy and crazy, and you don't care about problems, and you don't care about other people. But could you talk to that? Is it a strategy, or is it just the way you see the world?
I think particularly with President Trump, I mean, he believes that he can will positivity into existence. You know, he believed that in business.
And he
believed
does it.
that on the campaign trail. And
Yeah.
and yeah, he does it in government. It is infectious. It is an infectious style of leadership to try to draw people to their highest achievements.
Right.
And President Trump is unique in that he can at times create a competitive environment in which people literally have to, create more and more optimism, more and more progress, more and more success just to stay at the table. And I like that. I think that it also breeds a meritocracy around the president. And it's why, frankly, some people don't last long. You know, if they're unwilling to get with that type of a leadership style, they find themselves out of the government. As for me, I think we still have a lot to be positive about, and I think that we have to frame our vision and our values in a way that draw people to our cause. Look, we might not want to admit it, but the dominant political movement in America today is this Black Lives Matter movement, and the way I think to combat the downstream effects of that is to unapologetically embrace Americanism, and then, as you've done on social media, push back against the tactics that just try to silence people. I mean, this whole characterization of white privilege is a racist characterization. It's racist because it is telling someone, because of the color of your skin, you have a diminished contribution to make to our country and to our conversation. And I just don't think that anybody should be told based on their background or their skin color that they have a diminished contribution to make. Now, not many politicians are willing to say that because they're afraid of being called racist or privileged for saying it. But I think that when you tell people the truth, that is ultimately the most productive and most optimistic thing you can do.
Here's the way I put it. You come across a kid in a well, trapped at the bottom of the well. Is the first question you ask, how'd you get there? Because it depends how you got there. If you fell in the well one way, I'm not going to help you. But if you fell in the well the other way, I'll help you. How does that make sense? Kids at the bottom of the well. You don't care if he's black. You don't care if he's white. Kids at the bottom of the fucking well. Can you help him out? Right? So, and I think that we get lost in the past. It's like, well, this kid got in the bottom of the well because his parents were, they were drug addicted and blah, blah, blah. But this other one had a history, a legacy of racism and slavery that has rippled into the future, which is a real thing. I don't think anybody would doubt that there's a ripple effect. But once you're at the bottom of the well and you're a baby, it's just not your fault. and thinking about how you got there is so unproductive when you should just say, baby at the bottom of the well. What can we do about that? All right. What would you do about the protests and especially the CHOP, the Seattle place? Do you think the president should be more involved, either verbally or with assets? How would you handle that?
Look, the bottom line is we can't let these things get set up, because once they do get fortified. I mean, there are a lot of guns in that place. And let's just have some honest talk about this, Scott. We could march the National Guard in there and take the CHOP, the Chaz over in a matter of moments, but there would be loss of life. And I don't know that this country is ready to handle that. And so I'm grateful that in Washington, D.C., as they've tried to set up an autonomous zone, the president, the chief of staff have ensured that will not happen. The weak leadership in Seattle, though, can be contagious. I think as Americans look at what is going on, it affects our sense of security and safety. And it also tells the permanent criminal element that they have more latitude now. They have more latitude in my town and in your town because of what is going on in Seattle. Now, ultimately, I really do view it as more like akin to the Occupy Wall Street thing. I think this ultimately fizzles out. But if I were the mayor of Seattle, there would be no way that anybody would be stopping the delivery of care and ambulatory services and police to people who are in need. I think it is infectiously bad leadership. And I'm grateful that the president isn't allowing this to be set up anywhere else, particularly in our nation's capital.
But you would agree, this is a tough one, because as you said, just one death, especially caught on camera, as we know that magnifies it. It would just take one death by a government gun, and we're right back to square one. So, I don't know that anybody is smart enough to know how long to wait, how much force to put on it. But I saw this interesting development, which is apparently the businesses will be able to sue the city. And I always say, if the government can't work it out, the insurance companies will, because ultimately everything gets priced for risk, and it just won't be affordable to be bad government anymore. It just can't afford
Well,
it.
but think about the impact on the marketplace, right? If my business interruption insurance risk profile is different because I'm in a liberal city that is going to defund and dismantle the police and keep them from going in certain areas, then what will happen is it'll be easier to get necessary business interruption insurance in places where you have strong leadership, where the law will be enforced. So what that will do is create more blight, more flight of capital out of these places. And frankly, while that will inure to the benefit of states like Florida, it's not good for the country to have such a depressed sense of confidence in areas that have embraced these values.
I'm starting to wonder if there aren't some urban areas that just can't be fixed. In other words, maybe you just have to find a field somewhere and build a new city where you get things right from the start. Do you think the urban areas, do you think Baltimore even can be fixed? I don't know if there's any amount of money you could put in there, because the basic problem is that the leaders are too easily bought, if we can be honest. If you're a mayor, it's just too easy to be bought off by the wrong people.
No, it's so interesting you say that, because right now, as you and I are talking, Joe Biden's team is out there vetting all of these urban mayors for potential selection for vice presidency. And I mean, my guess is that it's going to be very difficult for any of them to pass vet, because you're right, a lot of it is pay for play in these urban cities. And it's one of the reasons why, despite very high taxes, despite a ton of money flowing in from the state and federal government, quality of life isn't really improving for the people. Right? And so that begs the question, well, is the Trump strategy of like the opportunity zone the right antidote? And frankly, I've got some doubts about that. Like, I don't know if when you pit one community against another, if that's really the role of government. Like, right, if you're a Wawa and you're deciding where to go build 50 stores, is it really right for the federal government to say, well, if you build them in community A instead of community B, we're designing that outcome to try to direct the flow of your capital? So I think time will tell whether or not the Democrat strategy of, building the largesse of government, abandoning your people, and then just sort of being along for the ride for the neo-Marxist revolution is the right play, or whether this kind of Trump play of opportunity zones and seeing if you can socially engineer economic success is the right way. I mean, I think ultimately the way every American society flourishes is when the uniquely American institutions flourish, when we have strong families, when we have strong churches, when we have empowered parents with school choice. And by the way, in Florida, we just signed the largest expansion of school choice in our state's history, so we'll be a laboratory for that concept. I think that's the institutional strength is probably better than the government economic engineering or just the government theft.
I'm going to take the third path. As you laid it out, there are kind of these two general approaches. I think the third path is, let's be more organized about testing these different approaches. Because, I don't think anybody's smart enough to know what works. That's the problem, right? If we were smart enough, we'd just be doing that. Oh, that works. Let's just do that thing. We're all smart. But see, if you don't know, you got to test it. And then you got to make sure that your test is really telling you what you think it is. So it's got to be designed right. But it seems to me that we should just be focusing on, all right, here's a place that's trying this thing. Here's a place that's trying the other thing. We'll check back in 6 months or a year, see how it looks. Do more of that.
Well, and that is the promise of our great federalist system, right? But the problem is that you drain that promise when you have corrupt people that now in some of these urban areas are trying to externalize their conflict, right? Like the mayor of Seattle has a problem in her own community, and so she blames Donald Trump for being a racist as the reason why. And it's that is the most unproductive, I think, way to resolve this rather than the testing strategy you laid out.
if I could fix the world, it would look like this. You'd have teams of, let's say, consultant type people who could be brought in on request, not forced in, to a city to say, look, we're just going to have this external team run your city for a year, fix things up, get rid of the corruption because they're sort of uncorruptible because they're well paid and they come from somewhere else. And at the end of the year, we'll have have an election and try to put somebody in. But the big problem is that the money is corrupting at the local level. And if you have people who can be corrupted, they will be. I don't know that there's anything that can be done about that. So unless you bring in almost like untouchables, and I talk about it as like government in a box. Just bring in the government in a box with the intention that it's
like a chia pet. Just add water, and your government will grow. Well,
yeah.
But I think part of that type of engagement requires fair, free, open, honest discussion and debate. And I was listening to your intro, Scott, about these voices that have been taken offline and the different dynamics and equities that are being balanced. And I have to share, I was quite taken when I saw a tweet from a Republican leader, Nikki Haley, recently, that when she observed what was going on online, she was troubled by it, but any more regulation would just put lawyers and bureaucrats in charge, and that really is an equally bad ill. And so she presumed that we just have to sort of sit back and accept the fact that free speech is eroded in our country. And that's loser talk to me. I don't believe that we just kind of surrender to the cancel culture. And just as we're hearing in the social justice space now that it's not enough to not be a racist, you have to be anti-racist. There's only two groups of people. There's racists and there's anti-racists. So I want to apply that to the cancel culture. I guess there's either the people who cancel or the people who uncancel. And I want to do some uncanceling. I think that even if people have said things that are controversial or uncouth in an unguarded moment or in an impassioned moment, we ought to have the opportunity to invite the best of the contributions people can make to our discourse. And we should not be so frail as a nation that we cannot hear things that offend us and then respond to it with more productive speech. So that's my riff on where we are on the cancel culture.
So if there were some more government, let's say muscle or regulation, let's call it, on the social media platforms, what form would that take? What would that look like in your preferred world?
I believe that digital media platforms availing themselves to the benefits of Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act should be required to be transparent about the extent to which their platform truly is content neutral. And I think that there is the common carrier approach, but there is simply a demand for transparency that can be built into the exoskeleton of the Communication Decency Act to say, okay, well, if you don't want these liabilities for being an aggregator or a curator or a content developer, then you have to open the kimono and demonstrate that it is in fact neutral. And I think an appeal process could be required by the government that would shed a lot of light onto the decision making that goes into what is promoted, what is suppressed, what is banned, what is allowed.
But a lot of these that we saw from the undercover Project Veritas video on Facebook, that it's not so much company rules that are changing things, but there are individuals making judgment calls, and there are lots of them. How do you change that?
I think that if that process becomes more transparent, it will be easier to identify the sort of corrosive and rotten places within it. Right now, we don't even get a peek. We're told these are private companies. We don't have to be we the government, we the people, really just have to accept whatever our Silicon Valley free speech hall monitors tell us. And there is no mechanism by which to vindicate our own voice. And I think that you get to that element of the people who are running it. Also, I think there have to be consequences. When folks like Project Veritas, and they are fantastic, by the way, when they go find these things out, I think that there should be investigations. There should be reviews. The problem, Scott, just to be candid with you, is that big tech has bought off Congress. And it's not that hard to do because Congress can't really act if a small group of people are opposed to it. So if you go and deploy, 3 lobbyists for every U.S. senator, if big tech goes and starts hiring the children and spouses of members of Congress for jobs, which, by the way, they do all the time, then it really retards our ability to demand the transparency that that would fully realize our First Amendment rights.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing some kind of rule that says you can't vote if your kid is involved in one of those companies. I wouldn't mind that. Um, and tell me given that police reform got stalled because literally nobody in Congress, wants the solution so much as they want the issue. Apparently, I'm accepting you from that. What would you do to break the logjam? And let me just throw this idea on top. I think there needs to be a national education about police and race, just so we're all on the same page about what the data is and what the options are. What's the plus and minus for each of these? Yes on chokeholds, no on chokeholds, and talk it through. Would it help to educate the public so that the public can push Congress, or is there a better way to get something done?
Well, right now in Congress, it is all virtue signaling with very little virtue. On the police reform front, I would support various repositories for the type of training, data, and information that you described, so that we are all singing out at the same hymnal. Now it sort of feels like people are striking up different chords and different notes at different times. But on the specifics of the policy, there are areas of agreement. Like, I am not going to defend no-knock warrants. To me, like, if the government is entering your home and they are not telling you why, that is a problem. And where I'm from, we have the castle doctrine. Somebody comes in your home with the intent to do you harm, you have the ability to respond with lethal force. So I do think that there are ways to improve policing, like changing the no-knock warrant system. But right now, Democrats don't want a bill. They want the ability to blame Republicans, and I think that too often is just sort of where we go to in Washington, D.C. The solution here, Scott, is going to come, I think, still at the local level. I think you see places developing different technologies, strategies on policing. They work to different degrees. I think best practices will be copied, around the country, and hopefully that's a way to continue to improve the profession. But I'm certainly not going to be a part of demonizing, demoralizing, defunding the profession. And the craziest thing about this bill the Democrats have, it seems to want to put law enforcement at an equal level of force with the people that would terrorize our communities. Like, since when did we believe that we ought to go into a fight equally armed and manned with, like, the gangs and cartels? I mean, I want the people enforcing the law and protecting our citizenry to have an overwhelming advantage in force from those who would do us harm.
Yeah, when we talk about eliminating the police, I have surprisingly been open to the idea, but only if you start from scratch and develop a community with that expectation. In other words, you might have less privacy, more video surveillance, more neighborhood watch or something. But you couldn't get rid of the police entirely, but I'll bet you could take it down 50%.
Well, my view is informed by the vulnerable. One of the major moments in my life was when I was 9 years old and I was in the car with my mom, who was in a wheelchair, and she was mugged, and we had to call the police. And when you're there with a mother in a wheelchair, you start to realize how vulnerable some of us are, and we need strong law enforcement for the protection of the vulnerable. And so I'm heavily informed by that, and I'm so grateful for police that respond in those circumstances where they're needed.
All right, so I don't want to take any more of your time because I know you've got a country to run here. It needs your help. I got to say, I've been watching a lot of people on TV, on the news, and certainly on the Republican side. You are by far the best communicator the Republicans have. There's nobody even close at this point, and I think that speaks well for your future. So thanks for coming on, Congressman Matt Gaetz, and make sure everybody takes a look at your podcast, Hot Takes. If you just Google it, you'll find out where that is. Anything else you want to add, Matt?
Just that I'm grateful to be on, and hopefully next time I will take fewer than 5 attempts to connect for a little coffee with Scott Adams, but much appreciated, my friend.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a great day.